Hello, dear friends. Shavua Tov. This is the Motzei Shabbat of Parshat Vayigash. I'd like to say a few words about the passing of my teacher and mentor, Rabbi Chaim Drukman, who I spent 5 years with at a very young age. I had come to Israel with my father. I was at the age of 15 to enroll in the Or Tzion Yeshiva, who I had received recommendations about. And we'd set up a meeting with Rabbi Drukman and asked where he was, and somebody pointed, there he is. He was driving on his bicycle, coming towards the building. Father said, I see you ride a bicycle. I said, yes. And this was my first meeting with Rabbi Drukman, and it was already a statement about him. He was a man who believed in simplicity. He never wore a suit unless he left Israel on some journey where he had to meet with people outside of the country, but in Israel, he never wore a suit, never wore a tie, a white shirt on Shabbat, a blue shirt during the week. That was it. No frills. Even in his house, no frills. Lots and lots of books. A house is a place to experience life, to be with the people that you love. It wasn't about ornate decorations, a certain simplicity in his life. And was something right away which I noticed. There's a story told by Rabbi David Cohen, who is called the Nazir. He was a close disciple of Rav Kook. And he tells the story how he first met Rav Kook in his introduction to Orat HaKodesh. Rav Kook had left Israel for a conference of Agudat Yisrael, and he got stuck because of World War I. He got stuck in Europe. He went to London, and on a visit to Switzerland, David Cohen, who was called the Nazir later on because he was actually lived like a Nazarene, never cut his hair, never drank wine. He went to meet Rav Kook, and they were staying in the same place, in the same house. And in the morning, he heard Rav Kook reciting the Parshat HaKedah, the story of the binding of Isaac, which is the beginning of our prayer book, at the beginning of the Siddur, with great fervor and with song. At that moment, he decided, that's my rabbi. After he met Rav Kook, the Nazir asked him, is there also a philosophy that goes together with this, some type of thought mode and way of understanding the world? And Rav Kook, of course, told him, yes. Something like that happened to me when I met Rabbi Drukman, because upon entering Or Etzion, the thing that first comes to mind when you meet Rabbi Drukman is his devotion to tefillah, to prayer. Every word was pronounced clearly. And when he used to daven, when he used to pray Musaf on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, it was as if he was standing before the heavenly court and asking for mercy and beseeching the heavenly court for mercy on the entire Jewish people. That experience was very profound. It's interesting that I can remember to this day exactly how his davening was, the music for every word, because of the fact that it had made such a great impact on me. Rav Chaim, as a child, was a survivor of the Shoah. He was born in Kitov, Poland, the birthplace of the Baal Shem Tov's brother-in-law, and a city which experienced generations of Hasidim. He and his parents hid during the Nazi occupation, and he made Aliyah alone through Aliyat Nor in 1944 at the age of 12. He was reunited with his parents after the war and joined the army, the Israeli army, through a Bnei Kiva Nachal unit. While in Or Etzion, I do not remember him ever talking about experiences during the Shoah. In fact, his family members mentioned that he also did not talk about it until much, much later. He only mentioned making Aliyah alone as a child at the age of 12, possibly as a reaction to his two near-death experiences in the Shoah. Rav Drukman lived the life of a man on a mission. The mission was to disseminate the Torah of Eretz Israel, as taught by Rabbi Avraham Isaac Kook and his son Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, under whom Rav Chaim, Rav Drukman, studied in the Merkaz Harav Yeshiva. Now, the meeting with Rav Tzvi Yehuda happened almost by chance. As Rav Chaim's son-in-law, Uzi Bindenfeld, writes, Rav Chaim was active in Bnei Akiva, and he became the editor of its magazine, which is called Zraim. He published an article discussing whether one should cut their hair or shave on the Israel Independence Day, despite its falling on the days of the Omer, when somebody is not supposed to get a haircut. He quoted Rav Unterman, who was then the Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Israel, who told him that he permitted it. The article was published in Zraim. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook read the article and had a comment about something Rabbi Drukman had written about the land of Israel, the state of Israel, and wanted to speak with him. This meeting was a watershed moment for Rav Chaim, who was taken by the immense scholarship and presence of Rav Kook, the son. Soon afterwards, he enrolled into Rav Kook's Merkaz Harav Yeshiva. It's interesting, when I was in Merkaz Harav, we always called Rabbi Kook the Rav. When I was in Or Etzion, the Rav, of course, was Rabbi Drukman. And that makes sense. When I was in the Or Etzion High School, I went to visit Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda at his house in Jerusalem. I wanted to know who this man was, who was the teacher of Rabbi Drukman. So I was invited by a friend to join Rav Tzvi Yehuda for Suda Shlishit, the third meal on Shabbat. He asked me who I was. I told him I was studying at Or Etzion Yeshiva under Rav Drukman. I was a student of Rav Drukman. And Rav Tzvi Yehuda's face lit up with a huge smile. You're a student of Rav Drukman, he said, and he smiled again. In fact, when I came back also a few weeks after for Suda Shlishit again, he said, this is the student of Rav Drukman. When I applied to study at the Merkaz Harav Yeshiva in Jerusalem years later, Rabbi Avram Shapira interviewed me and asked, why are you coming here if you're already studying with Rav Drukman? In addition to teaching the Torah of Rav Kook, Rav Drukman wanted to educate the new generation towards Jewish national responsibility to the state of Israel and to Jews wherever they lived. His main focus in the yeshiva was to push graduates into either Jewish education as teachers in yeshivot and high schools, or to serve in the national institutions such as the army, the police force, or in any way really to help the state. The state of Israel for Rav Drukman was a gift of God's mercy to the Jewish people who were still recovering from the trauma of the Shoah and learning to rebuild themselves as a people. Building, defending, and developing the state was a special mitzvah of our times. However, the study of Torah was the inner battery that supported it all. The study of Torah is compatible to all the mitzvot together, the Mishnah in Peah says, 1:1. There's an expression that was in Bnei Akiva, Eretz Yisrael b'li Torah, keguf b'li neshama, that the land of Israel without Torah is like a body without the soul. Rav Chaim believed that not just Torah observant life, but Torah study was of prime importance. Every child deserves a Torah education, and any adult who has the ability should study according to their ability. The student body in the Or Etzion Yeshiva High School was fully integrated with local boys from the Moshavim in the area, many of whom came from families whose parents did not even finish high school. The years I was there in that high school, I can tell you the Ashkenazic boys were definitely in the minority, and there was just a handful of English speakers. Rav Chaim encouraged integration and saw it as a holy task to bring Torah education to all those who wanted it. He was also a big believer in the power of song. On Shabbat afternoon after Mincha, as the sun was setting, the whole yeshiva would sit in the study hall and sing with Rav Chaim until the Shabbat ended. This was the practice in the Hesder Yeshiva too. When I entered 12th grade, he opened the Hesder Yeshiva in Or Etzion. Even though I was in high school, I joined the classes, many of which were taught by Rav Chaim at 11 p.m. or at midnight, due to his heavy schedule. In the high school, I felt that some of the students did not have the ability to appreciate Rav Chaim due to their tender age. Therefore, the opening of the Hesder was really his calling, in my opinion. Those first years of the yeshiva were an amazing experience, with students who were totally devoted to the idea of Torah study, fear of heaven, and national responsibility. They drank from the fountains of his Torah knowledge with a genuine intellectual thirst. and deep personal motivation. Many studied in the Beit Midrash daily until 1 in the morning. Rav Drukman was also a great defender of the people, no matter who they were. On Rosh Hashanah afternoon, the yeshiva would walk with him to do tashlich. There was no body of water nearby, but there was a water pipe which emerged from the ground. And as we would walk to it on the side of the highway, cars would pass us. There was somebody who commented about those driving on Rosh Hashanah. Rav Chaim immediately retorted that the driver must have been a doctor on duty. The second car came by. He described him as a policeman on duty. The third as an army officer on duty. Rav Chaim was not willing to listen to any criticism of the Jewish people, specifically not on Rosh Hashanah. When he decided to enter politics, the National Religious Party, some of us were upset that he wouldn't have enough time to teach us, but he prioritized the midnight classes with Hesder Yeshiva. Years later, I discovered that Rav Chaim didn't even want to enter politics, but that Rav Eliezer Waldman, Rav Chaim's study partner and friend, and Hanan Porat convinced Rav Tzvi Yehuda that this was critical, and he told Rav Chaim that he had to enter politics. Rav Chaim's presence in the National Religious Party brought them votes, but they failed to deliver on the promise to make him Minister of Education. After this event, Rav Tzvi Yehuda disowned the NRP in a letter that he publicly publicized. Rav Chaim then created the Matzad, which was the Zionist religious party, which garnished a few seats, but later returned to the National Religious Party, saying that he did not want it. It didn't want it to go down in history that he was the one who had brought down the NRP. Rav Chaim was very accessible. If I needed to meet him, he would set up a meeting in the Knesset. He always had an open ear to listen and to help in the way he could. And there's a lot to say about that. I'm going to skip over one or two things. At the moment, just two. Now, Chaim was a man of action and a teacher. He was active as a young man in Bnei Akiva. He was a madrich of the famous Shevet Eitanim, produced some of the greatest rabbinic figures in religious Zionism. Joined the Bnei Akiva executive, helped set up Kerem B'Yavnei Yeshiva. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Or Etzion for years, really till his death. Set up the Hesder Yeshiva, which he also taught there as long as he could. He was active in the Knesset for 15 years. He headed the conversion authority and headed the council for Yeshivot Hesder and gave numerous shiurim around the country. For me, he was a major inspiration, both as a rabbi and almost like a second father, because I was in Israel alone from the age of 15. He introduced me to the spirit of Torah, Torat Eretz Yisrael, by example and by instruction. Our sages say that when a tzaddik, a righteous person, leaves town, Pana Hoda, Pana Ziva, Pana Hadara. The town, the radiance, the splendor, and the beauty of that town diminishes. Rav Chaim's passing leaves the world a little bit dimmer. It's up to us to fill that gap with the radiance of mutual love and respect, and a renewed commitment to Torah study and the Jewish people in this land. I don't want to end here. I want to mention something Rav Chaim said about this parsha, Parshat Vayigash, because that's where we are now. And I think it's very befitting. It says about when Joseph meets Benjamin. So it says that he falls on Benjamin's shoulders and cries, and Benjamin fell on his shoulders and cried. Vayipolav tzavarav, and then Benjamin says Vayipolav vayivku. They fell on each other's shoulders and cried. Rashi brings a midrash, but doesn't actually mention that it's a midrash. Because usually when Rashi says something which is not the pshat, he says it's a midrash. Rashi says, why did Joseph fall on Benjamin's shoulders? And Benjamin fall on Joseph's shoulders, not because that's what you normally do when you cry, but Joseph was crying over the two temples, two Batei Mikdash, that were in the portion of Benjamin, that they would, of course, be destroyed. And Benjamin was crying over Mishkan Shiloh, the sanctuary of Shiloh, which was in Joseph's future lot, which was going to be destroyed. So Rav Drukman said, according to this midrash, which Rashi brings, something doesn't make sense. Why can't, if they're both crying about the sanctuaries in the temple, then Joseph should cry about the sanctuary of Shiloh, which is in his portion, and Benjamin should cry about the fall of the temples, which is in his portion. Why is each one crying for the other guys? So Rav Drukman explained that this is also a metaphor, because our rabbis say that the first temple was destroyed because of shfichut damim, which means murder. And the second temple was destroyed because of hatred for no reason. Both these things Joseph experienced with his brothers. First, they tried to kill him, and then they sold him into slavery, and it was all hatred, baseless hatred. Sinat chinam. So basically, Joseph went through this experience which brought down the two temples, and that's why he's falling on Benjamin's shoulders. I want to continue for a moment. You could say, why did Benjamin fall on Joseph's shoulders? And about Mishkan Shiloh, you might also say, because Mishkan Shiloh was a temporary sanctuary, and then it was taken away. Just like Joseph was a temporary brother who was taken away from Benjamin for 17 years. So I think it's more than 17 years, for 20 years. So in this sense, there is sort of like, it can be understood as a metaphor. Now, another thing that Rav Drukman explained was the second time when it's mentioned the parsha about falling on shoulders and crying is Joseph with Yaakov. It says that Joseph fell on Yaakov's shoulders and cried more. But it doesn't say that Yaakov cried. Rashi says, why didn't Yaakov cry? Because he was reading Kriyat Shema, the paragraph of the Shema from Devarim chapter 6, which is, of course, puzzling. It's a midrash, but it's puzzling. What does that mean? So Rav Drukman explained, again, this midrash is a metaphor. You see, Yaakov realized that the enmity of the brothers was at least partially caused by the fact that he had shown a special relationship to Joseph. And so he decided he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to show that all his sons are his sons equally. And so he was afraid that if he would start crying too much, showing too much relationship to Joseph, to all the other sons, he had learned his lesson, basically. You have to treat your children equally. And therefore, at that moment, he decided to turn his love to God, which is the first passage of Kriyat Shema, which says, "V'ahavta Hashem Elohecha," you shall love the Lord your God with all your might, with all your soul. In order to, as I said, show this equality. Rav Drukman passed away on Hanukkah, and in the parsha where we talk about Joseph, which is very symbolic. Joseph, of course, Yosef is Gematria Tzion, Zion. Hanukkah is about bringing back Jewish life into the land of Israel, which was made pagan by Antiochus IV, and bringing back Jewish sovereignty. Both these things represent the life of Rav Drukman. It's bringing back Jewish sovereignty, but bringing back Jewish sovereignty through the Torah of Israel, through the religion of Israel, through the belief system of the Jewish people. It's not just a land of Jews, it's a Jewish land. And this he pushed for. He even said at one point that as a child, he said, as a young man, he thought maybe Judaism was over. So now establishing the state of Israel and bringing Torah life to the state of Israel was being able to hold testimony to the fact that the Jewish people actually survived the Shoah. Because surviving just as a people, without a direction, without a belief, is not full survival. And so he was, in a sense, one of the Josephs of our generation and a Maccabee of our generations, fighting for the full restoration of Jewish life in all its facets, in all its beliefs, in order to be an inspiration for the Jewish people and the world at large. Yehi zichro baruch v'zecher tzadikim livracha. Shalom, shalom.